Let's see. Michael, do you know how we do this with spotlighting the teacher?
Not sure. Let's see.
Spotlight for everyone. There we go. Did you do that?
I did not.
I
I,
did it. I did it.
ooh, who's
Me,
I?
Dan.
Huh?
Me, Dan.
Dan, okay. All right, here we go. Let's bow in and welcome everyone to the Path of Awakening Buddhist Center course. Tonight, we continue working our way through the three volumes, the third volume now, of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. These are talks given by Trungpa Rinpoche over a period of about 15 years at seminary every year, in which he divided the period of time, usually about 3 months, and speaking and teaching to anywhere from 150 to 250 students. And he divided these 3 months into the three periods covering the Hinayana, or foundational vehicle teachings, the Mahayana, or greater vehicle teachings, the Bodhisattva teachings of the Bodhisattvayana, and then finally the Vajrayana, the Adamantine or indestructible vehicle teachings. And we are now on the Vajrayana. We're doing chapter 3 tonight. And Michael, take it away.
Okay. So the title of this chapter is Entering the Diamond Path on a Solid Foundation. And once again, we're reminded that our ability to understand and practice the Vajrayana is dependent on what we have learned and realized through the Hinayana or foundational vehicle and the Mahayana or greater vehicle. In particular, he starts right out by saying the precision of Hinayana and the larger mindedness of Mahayana enable us to become fearless. So the first part of the foundation of entering the Diamond Path is the possibility of fearlessness. And in particular, what we're talking about here reminded me of back during the 16th Karmapa's visit to Boulder, where I participated in a group audience with him. He asked the people present, before we could ask him any questions, what was meditation practice like for us? And someone answered that I feel when I do meditation, I'm opening myself to myself. And the Karmapa said in English, very good. And then in Tibetan, through his translator, that's exactly how it should be. And the way that we open ourselves to ourselves is not through any kind of analysis or evaluation or goal-oriented effort of any kind, but rather simply allowing ourselves to settle into who we are, which is why in this opening section on the possibility of fearlessness, he says that fearlessness is based on developing Maitri, or loving kindness, thoroughly and fully. So Maitri, or loving kindness, ultimately means a loving attitude toward all beings, but begins with a loving attitude, an attitude of friendliness toward ourselves, where we're able to simply be with ourselves just as we are. And we experience this in meditation practice in a very simple way when we allow ourselves just to see our thoughts, perceptions, and feelings come and go without labeling anything good or bad, without reacting, without engaging in any way, but simply allowing ourselves to be just as we are. And that as we do this, we're increasingly able to open ourselves to ourselves. We're able to settle into who we are. We're able to let go of constant struggle to be different or to make things different, and instead relate to ourselves and the world just as it is and just as we are. And ultimately, this is loving kindness, making friends with ourselves. And it's this that allows us to actually be fearless, because we're not afraid of ourselves. We're not ashamed of ourselves. We're not feeling that we're lacking anything. And more than that, as we settle, we become increasingly able to recognize, uh, identify with, develop confidence in our inherent wakefulness, just our capacity to be awake and be present right on the spot. So this is why he says that fearlessness is based on making a commitment that from now onward, until the attainment of enlightenment, we'll continue working with ourselves. And this is what we do through our meditation practice, as well as our study. And with this, we begin to feel that we can be students of the Vajrayana, that we have a ground, an actual ground that we can hang on to, which is that we've begun to make friends with ourselves. We've begun to open ourselves to ourselves. We've begun to relax with who we are. And that this foundation, the precision of Hinayana, the larger mindedness or compassion of the Mahayana, is what makes possible the vast openness, the greater identification with awareness that is the Vajrayana. So this fearlessness relates directly to the next section, which is titled Heightened Neurosis. And the idea here is that, as he says, having developed this ground of friendliness where we're able to open ourselves and just simply be with ourselves, we begin to find that nevertheless, there are all kinds of neuroses. He says that in studying the Vajrayana, we find that our neuroses are heightened. Because we've developed openness and clarity, even a little bit of neurosis, such as having resistance to putting mail in the mailbox, something as simple as that, becomes tremendously heightened because we're increasingly aware of what our state of mind is, how we're experiencing ourselves, how we're experiencing the world. It's not that we become more neurotic, we become more aware. It's like if there's a lot of noise in the house, and then as things begin to quiet down, we become increasingly aware of the quieter sounds that were obscured. In the same way, we become more and more aware of ourselves, how our minds work, what we're feeling. And for that reason, we begin to see more. We become more open to ourselves. We begin to develop through the settling, which is shamatha practice, basic mindfulness, basic coming back, we begin to develop vipassana, clear seeing, a greater awareness. So, and for that reason, it's there's more awareness as mind settled. But also with the Vajrayana, we become more willing to work with and face neurosis. We actually, as we'll talk about in a little while, actually come to see the energetic quality of neurosis has tremendous potential, tremendous possibility. Just as we talked about, a couple of weeks back when we talked about the Buddha families. But the basic point is that because we've developed friendliness towards ourselves, because we've developed Maitri, we're no longer running from ourselves. We're no longer trying to hide from ourselves or trying to hide whatever it is that we might think is shameful or not up to snuff, or whatever negative feeling we might have about ourselves. We're beginning to let that go. And we're just beginning to see through that as unnecessary confusion. He says that this idea of neurosis is just a simple neurotic connection or attitude to ourselves. And this is what we're opening ourselves to and letting go of. So basically, there are three levels of neurosis that he talks about in this chapter. The first was body neurosis, and then speech neurosis, and also mind neurosis. And with body neurosis, he says in the Vajrayana, our attitude toward our body is important and becomes unusually clear. Our body is that, he defines body as that which receives impressions, reacts to hot and cold, pleasure and pain. Well, we learned in meditation practice that, in fact, working with body is important, that just simply taking a good posture and allowing ourselves to just settle right where we are is an important part of synchronizing body and mind, that we can bring ourselves back to here, right where we are in our bodies, rather than, flying off in a flight of fantasy, a flight of despair, a flight of whatever we might get caught up in. That we could just simply settle here and now in our bodies. And that for this reason alone, working with body, working with posture, working with some understanding of our physicality is important. In fact, it's said in the Vajrayana that there's great wisdom in the body, and that this begins again with just our ability to simply be here where we are in our body. I also thought in terms of the body neurosis, that it was interesting to take a look back at the reading we did a few weeks back from Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, where Trungpa Rinpoche talked about the three lords of materialism. And he didn't say Lord of body, he actually said Lord of form. But he talked about the Lord of form as being the neurotic pursuit of physical comfort, security, and pleasure, where we manipulate our surroundings so as to shield ourselves from the irritations of the raw, rugged, unpredictable aspects of life. He says that it doesn't signify these rich and secure life situations that we create per se, but rather it refers to the neurotic preoccupation that drives us to create them. In this chapter, he says, in the case of body neurosis, our body is something that we would like to hold on to keep back as private property, our personal project. But I think essentially it's saying the same thing, that when we relate to our body in a neurotic way, we are trying to shield ourselves in some way from the world as it is, from ourselves as we are. That, again, rather than taking an attitude of Maitri, an attitude of appreciation toward ourselves, an attitude of beginning to identify with our potential, if not the reality of our potential sanity, that we feel in some way that we need to hide, that we need to, again, create some kind of cocoon of physical comfort, security, and pleasure, and that's a neurotic way of dealing with body. Speech neurosis, he says, refers to any expressions that come from the subconscious gossip level, or you could think of that as internal dialogue that we become increasingly aware of as we engage in meditation practice, the little thoughts that flit through our mind. Seemingly with or without any intention on our part. And he says that the subconscious level of these leads to expressions of hate or love, whether frivolous or meaningful. In terms of what we read about in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, the introduction section, he said the Lord of speech refers to the use of intellect in relating to the world, that we adopt sets of categories which serves as handles, as ways of managing phenomena. And again, the use of intellect itself isn't the Lord of speech, but instead it's the inclination on the part of ego to interpret anything threatening or irritating in such a way as to neutralize the threat or turn it into something positive from ego's point of view. So there again, we're talking about passion and aggression and ignorance. And the main point being, again, that a neurotic relationship to speech is a way of, again, trying to shield ourselves in some way, trying and fixating on ourselves and fixating on others in such a way that we end up categorizing and hiding from, again, the raw, rugged, real aspects of life. And then he says with mind neurosis, which is the final of the three types of neuroses here, that mind here is basic mind, the mind which begins to make connections with our life. In mind neurosis, he says, our body neurosis and speech neurosis team up. So we begin to develop passion, aggression, and ignorance throughout our life. We relate to everything, having a fixated idea on oneself as being truly existent. Then we relate everything on the basis of what does it mean to me? If I like it, I want more of it, which is passion. If I don't like it, I want to at least push it away or get away from it, if not attack, which is aggression. And if doesn't seem to be anything, I ignore, which is, and it's through passion and aggression and ignorance that we basically sleepwalk through life. And again, rather than opening ourselves to ourselves, end up closing ourselves off from the world. He does say a little bit, again, about the Lord of Mind, but I'm going to save that for later because I think it fits in better in another part of this chapter. So he says all three neuroses, body, speech, and mind neuroses, are unreasonable from the point of view of Vajrayana. And yet from another point of view, they're all extraordinarily reasonable. They're studies in cause and effect and how we feel good, how we feel bad, how we feel hassled by the world, how we feel empty or lonely, how we feel needs of all kinds. And in the Vajrayana, we actually use these neuroses. We actually use, as he calls it, the original basic fermented piles of shit as our working basis. He then says, and this is, I think, the point I was trying to make before about why we experience heightened neurosis at times in our practice, particularly in the Vajrayana. He says, we've had body, speech, and mind neuroses taking place all along, but they become much more vivid and real in the Vajrayana due to the fact that we begin to work with them quite precisely. So that, in fact, in the Vajrayana, we actually work with neurosis as further ground for waking up, that the energetic quality in particular of neurotic patterns has the potential for waking us up if we're able to work with it directly and precisely. So he says, working with the next section, exactly that, working with neurosis, that neuroses become heightened because we're face to face with the real world. We're even scorched by the brilliant sunshine, he says. He says it's more immediate, and because of that closeness, we're bound to panic more at times. There's some back and forth here that is kind of interesting. I think what he's talking about here is, on the one hand, if we're not able to relate effectively with our experience of neurosis from the point of view of Hinayana and Mahayana ground, then they do take us over and they become a problem. We identify with neurosis, we act on neurosis, we act on the basis of passion, aggression, and ignorance, and then there's a problem. When we're able to simply be with our experience without engaging, without identifying, then there's tremendous richness within our neuroses. And that was, again, the whole point of the 5 Buddha families that we talked about a few weeks back, what the enlightened potential is in our experience of neurosis. So the idea is not that we act out our neurosis, not that we indulge in or identify, but also that we don't run from or try to block off. With the Vajrayana, everything becomes workable. He says, if we try to get to the end of neuroses, they never end. And then he says, why would you want to end them anyway? At the same time, there needs to be some kind of bravery. We are trying to get rid of them. We have to take that sort of Hinayana and Mahayana stand. So there's a bit of back and forth here, and I think it's similar to the instruction perhaps in sitting meditation, where we're urged not to be too tight and not to be too loose. That on the one hand, being too loose would be indulging, identifying with neurosis, and being too tight would be trying to repress and run away from them. And that with Vajrayana, we're actually working with these experiences. He says, in fact, in Vajrayana, we're not very hip. We're talking about very basic things that we actually can take quite literally. And he talks about the texts that tell us to eat meat and drink liquor. And he says, what can we say about that except to take it literally on the spot? We eat meat, drink liquor, and expand our minds victoriously. And that brings about a tremendous sense of humor. We're talking about some kind of celebration in eating meat and drinking liquor. It's very simple. This may seem crude and forceful, but it works. It's mysterious, but there's some kind of delight in the whole thing. And then he adds making love as well to the eating meat and drinking liquor. So these are, again, experiences that we could indulge in, go off the rails. But if we're able to maintain our seat, maintain our discipline, then they can wake us up and enliven us further and enrich our experience of the world. So this is why, as he says, the process of working with neurosis begins with the idea of mindfulness awareness in Hinayana, begins with developing discipline, begins with developing clarity, begins with settling down, simplifying, and actually looking at our experience directly and developing, as he says earlier, a sense of cause and effect. What happens when we do what leads to what creates states of mind, what creates problems, what helps us open further. So this begins with the idea of mindfulness awareness or meditation practice in the Hinayana, and continues with the dedication and gentleness of Mahayana, dedication in particular to working for the benefit of all sentient beings and not always putting ourselves first, but being willing to actually exchange self for other. And it's this that enables us to make our body, speech, and mind neuroses so vivid. And he compares this to a process of diagnosis, operation, and transplant. And then again, we're going back into how we might misunderstand working with neurosis. He says sometimes we glorify our body, speech, and mind neurosis as if we were kings and queens of the universe. We try to declare ourselves as the world's greatest, most powerful kings and queens. And he says this leads to two possibilities. Either we recognize all such declarations as neurosis and immediately get into the Vajrayana. In other words, either we see what's happening in our state of mind and wake up, or we remain stuck with our neurotic stuff. We continue to indulge and engage and, stay lost in our confusion. So it's, we can wake up on the spot or, fail to recognize and continue to indulge in a way that creates pain and suffering for us and others. The Vajrayana teaching instructs us to get out of or resign from that situation. At the same time, he says there is a kind of pride in the Vajrayana. That kind of proclamation or declaration is the working basis of the Vajrayana. It's why it's called the path in which the fruition is the journey. In the Vajrayana, he says, we don't talk about developing Buddha nature, but we say Buddha nature is right here on the spot right now. So it's right what we experience right here, right on the spot, that we can wake up at any moment. Because our potential is our fruition, that we can be fully realized being right here on this very spot. And he says to discover this ground of Vajrayana, we actually begin to heighten our body, speech, and mind neuroses. He says we have to experience the fullness of these neuroses in terms of their enlightened possibilities and their energetic aspect. And so again, this, I think the easiest way to see this perhaps is to again refer back to our study of the Buddha families and the possibility, for instance, that we can experience the spacious, accommodating, and patient wisdom that exists as a possibility within ignorance, or we can experience the clarity, mirror-like precision, and all-accomplishing aspect of the energy of aggression. Or we can experience the generous, gentle, appreciative, and communicative quality of passion. When we're able to experience these energies without being ego-centered, without grasping, without fixation. And that's the choice we have in the Vajrayana. We wake up on the spot, or we fail to do so. And in failing to do so, we remain stuck. He says bringing these elements together by means of discipline is called dompa, which means bondage, binding together. And he says that the message that our emotions or our body, speech, and mind neuroses can be worked with by means of prajna, or discriminating awareness wisdom, and upaya, or skillful means. This is what brings us into the Tantra. In the Vajrayana, he says we have a washcloth that cleans our face and body. And that's the basic idea of Tantra, that neurosis can be taken off. Our washcloth can be twisted so that at the end we have Tantra, which means continuity. And the reason for this is, for the view of the Vajrayana, is that whatever neurosis we might experience is not fundamental to our being. It's not intrinsic to who we are. That what's intrinsic to who we are is our basic awake nature. And that at any time we can wake up, at any time we can let go. And at any point in time, neuroses are just a temporary condition that's not inherent to who we are. So Tantra, which means continuity, he says what's continuing is that we're constantly going through this process of washing and cleaning up body neurosis, speech neurosis, and mind neurosis. We're washing continuously. And he says, yes, it's a drastic measure, but after we've taken the shower, what's left is confidence, because we come to identify fully with our awake nature. It's absolutely everything put together, which is much more delightful, fantastic, and haughty. But he warns us, if we run out halfway, we might catch something worse than pneumonia. Then the next section is titled An Awakening of Insight. And he says the next point is that Vajrayana provides an awakening of insight. We awaken our intrinsic insight, which is not particularly Buddha nature or enlightened genes or bodhicitta. It's actually much more than that. But I think the important thing there is realizing that this is intrinsic insight. It is fundamental to who we are. It is continuous with who we are. The problem is that we do not recognize that, and we don't, because we don't recognize, we don't have confidence in it. And through practice, through familiarization, through repeated coming back, working with ourselves, opening ourselves to ourselves, we come to recognize that, in fact, it is intrinsic to who we are. He says with that, we begin to experience what is known as freedom from fixation on our practice, freedom from grasping onto our practice. He says in the lower yanas, the Hinayana and Mahayana, practice is regarded as the only hope, but in Vajrayana, practice is not regarded in that way. In fact, it's sometimes regarded as an obstacle. So fixation on practice and regarding practice as the only saving grace is freed here. And this is why you can find books in the Vajrayana with titles like Buddhahood Without Meditation. Because the idea is that too much of a fixation on meditation practice becomes a problem. And this, I think, is what he talked about in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism with the Lord of Mind. This is the one that I didn't get to before, where he says the Lord of Mind refers to the effort of consciousness to maintain awareness of itself, of holding on to self-consciousness. So this is a way, this is how practice could become an obstacle. Doesn't mean practice is an obstacle, but it can become an obstacle if we relate to it from the point of view of mind neurosis, as something to hold on to, as, again, a way of shielding ourselves rather than opening ourselves to the world. When we are able to let go of fixation on practice, actually fixation on anything, then there's the possibility of vidya, or knowledge. And this is knowledge that he calls Vajrayana knowledge, which he says is knowledge that does not cling to or fixate on any kind of personal desire or ego-centeredness, or anything that would allow you to recover your egotism. That's the definition of vidya. And he says that here he says that the idea is that trying to understand your body, speech, and mind neurosis does not seem to work. In other words, it's not something that we come through an intellectual process or through a goal-oriented process. Thinking about how we don't want to hear about Vajrayana doesn't seem to work. Thinking about how Buddhism is good for your system, good for your jogging, or good for your evolutionary setting sun schemes does not seem to work. Again, it's allowing ourselves to be completely open to ourselves and completely open to the world without any kind of reference point. And if we, as he says, if we think that we'll come to this through understanding our body, speech, mind neurosis, or thinking about how Buddhism is good for us or good for our evolutionary sun-setting schemes, then if that's what we think, maybe we should stop right now. And on that, with stopping, he means just to wake up right on the spot. So with this, I'll turn it over to John for the next section, which is the view of reality in the three yanas. John, you're muted.
Barry, could you put it back to gallery view for a minute?
I have not been co-hosted, so.
No, somebody changed that. Oh, let's see. There we go.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a bit and actually experience a bit about what this state of mind is that the Vajrayana is describing. So if you take a posture, just for the heck of it, we don't really need to take a posture, a good meditation posture. You can do this anyway, standing on your head, even. But the main idea is that whatever you're looking at right now, just like that, there are moments when there's no thought, just open clarity, just a finger snap. This open clarity, in one degree or another, is what is being described here. It's without thought. It's simple, utterly simple. It's the simplest kind of knowing there is. You're hearing this voice. You're seeing your computer screen or whatever it is that you're looking at. You can feel, now that I mention it, your bottom on whatever you're sitting on. If there are any smells of dinner, they might be coming through. All of these things happen inexorably. You can't stop them. We are continually in this state of open awareness. Thoughts come and they go. They interrupt us in a way, take us away into a dream, a thought about this or that, like, oh, I don't get it, or yes, I do get it, or it doesn't matter. Because this basic, clear awareness goes on all the time. So this is a joke. You can relax now. This state of awareness is what we are. And what this path is about is coming into it more and more and more. We do it through meditation practice. We do it through study. You can do it wonderfully through the Lojong slogans, the practice of Tonglen. And this state of being and of knowing is completely, utterly natural to us. It's effortless. It's who and what we are. It's in our body. It's like, you come back to your own body and the mind and the body are synchronized. It's just right here. It's happening. And this is the heart of the Dharma. Appreciating this more and more is what Michael was talking about in this section, an awakening of insight. The insight really is the appreciation that we are already awake, that it is natural to us, that we can come back to this clear awareness. It has many names. Sometimes it's called bodhicitta, absolute bodhicitta. Sometimes it's said that this bodhicitta contains prajna, which is clear seeing, because clear seeing is here when we come back to this. It contains, and this is so important what Michael was talking about, maitri. Maitri is that when you come back to this awareness, you are seeing and accepting, without criticism, anything and everything that arises in your own being and mind. It's the kind of loving kindness towards yourself, without sentimentality. It's just an appreciation of whatever it is that is arising. So you could call this maitri, loving kindness. You could call it self-trust. You could call it confidence that we can just be here as we are, what we are, and see it. You don't have to act it out. You don't have to criticize it or modify it. It's in your body, as it were, the union of your body, speech, and mind. We all have it, a form of self-trust. This is really what it means to awaken, is to come into this kind of self-trust. So he talks about the view of reality in these three yanas and how it changes. This is the next section. He says the Vajrayana teaching is quite exceptional. It's really the best, beyond words, extraordinary. And it can only come about by having properly understood the individual enlightenment of the Hinayana and dedicating ourselves to others by means of the Mahayana. This is the process. We begin to understand what it means in the Hinayana to give up our neuroses by coming present, the accuracy and clarity of mind when we come present in this moment. And in the Mahayana, we begin to understand how, by helping others, we can generate kindness for ourselves and kindness for them. So there are three different ways of, you might say, seeing reality. In the Hinayana, we see it in terms of cause and effect. If I do this, that's going to happen. So I ought to do all the things that are being told to me, meditate, practice Maitri, compassion, do good acts, try to avoid bad ones, and that then I'll get a good result. And the good result would be freedom from neurosis. This is the view of the Hinayana. It's completely about cause and effect, causal. And that someday you'll experience the fruition of that, which would be enlightenment, nirvana. The Mahayana, we begin to see that all of this conceptual framework, is mythic, unreal, that it's empty is the term that's used in the Mahayana. Empty of what? Empty of real meaning. It's shunya. There's a great emphasis on this. They say that all the things that we thought about that existed, the cause and effect, don't. In fact, nothing has any true existence in the sense of being ongoing, being independent, being one thing. None of that's true. Everything is constantly being born and dying, much like these gestures and these words. Everything you see, experience in the moment. And in a lifetime, of course, everything is born and dies over the long term. Not only that, but everything is made up of parts which come and go. The cells in your body and your skin and all of that. And everything is utterly interdependent. We're interdependent right now on this screen and this world. So nothing has any true independent, unitary, ongoing existence. It's a constant flux or change. And this is what we learn in the Mahayana. This is the great emphasis on absolute truth, this is called shunyata. That I don't exist, other doesn't exist, that in fact it's a constantly changing matrix, just like your computer screen that you're looking at right now. This is regarded as the highest truth in the Mahayana. And the Bodhisattva, the practitioner of the Mahayana, studies this and devotes him or herself to helping other people come into this, because this is regarded as the escape from suffering. Suffering always has to do with bolstering up my personal existence, making me more solid and well. And when we begin to understand and discover emptiness, that's irrelevant. And so suffering disappears. And this is what's called the absolute truth. And it's seen as the cure for suffering. And of course, this is its virtue as well as its flaw. Because as long as we are looking for a cure, there's still a subtle I who is trying to understand things. The Vajrayana is all about returning to this world, paying more attention to relative truth rather than absolute truth. You see, in the Mahayana, relative truth means all these things, that's the relative truth, don't actually exist. That's the absolute truth. In the Vajrayana, they say, yet all these things, this shirt, these words, this image, all of these things appear and disappear from moment to moment, constantly changing, and that this is what is really real. The absolute truth is kind of an interpretation of it. They go together, relative and absolute truth. But in the Vajrayana, the relative truth is what's emphasized, because all of this is so beautiful, so vivid, so constantly communicating meaning, constantly involving our participation, our reaction, our play, our dance with reality. So the Vajrayana emphasizes what's called the Dharma Dhatu. That's the space of phenomena. Dharma in this sense means phenomena. Dhatu means space. And that's where we're living. We're living here in this space of phenomena. So while the Mahayana, I'm just going to repeat this, while the Mahayana emphasizes the absolute truth, which is shunyata, which is that all those things that we thought were so important, me and you, I and other, and everything that constellates between those two, is a myth. That's the Mahayana. And it represents freedom from samsara, freedom from confusion, freedom from suffering. And then in the Vajrayana, going beyond that, they're saying even that is still too egocentric, still too selfish, still too this idea of getting free from suffering and discovering absolute truth. And really what's happening is that we're living in the middle of this constant display, this constant dance, and it's beautiful. And we should appreciate that and begin to dance with it. So he says the Vajrayana, or diamond vehicle, that's what Vajra means. Vajra means, one of the ways to interpret that is diamond. Yana means vehicle, is powerful because it is derived from the tranquility and readiness of the Hinayana and the purity and soft heart, the compassion of the Mahayana. And so the Vajrayana is ready to launch its diamond ship. Yeah, now I'm going on to the next section, which is really what I've just covered. Absolute truth. The word is dundam in Tibetan. Means superior or superior meaning, higher meaning or higher understanding. Relative truth, which is kunzup, means kun means all, zup means outfit, like the clothes that you're wearing. So it's the outfit of everything. It's all the way in which phenomena manifest, the whole phenomenal world. So in the Vajrayana, you could almost say, as he puts it here, that kunzup, relative truth, all this beautiful arising of the phenomenal world, is primary or first. It's your first glimpse of the purity of this phenomenal world. And this is where the emphasis is more than on shunyata. And in fact, shunyata isn't really discussed all that much in the Vajrayana. There's a slogan that I've always loved. It says, this is a Vajrayana slogan. It says, things do not exist, all this stuff, shirts, cheeks, sounds, and yet they arise, they appear. They arise and appear, and yet they don't exist. This is the two truths coming together. And the emphasis is on the beauty and vividness of the way in which phenomena present. The Vajrayana teaches us that we are not Joe Schmidt, he said. He always used to love that, Joe Schmidt. But it's not that we have to transcend ego or somehow beat it down or understand that it's not there. It's just that ego does not actually exist. When we're here in the present, this is what exists. All this stuff. And he says that we realize that ego doesn't exist because we also realize Vajra nature. This world of apparent, constantly changing, relative phenomena. It's basically good. It's warm. It's living. Look at the colors. They're so vivid. There's tremendous warmth. And we're not practicing or studying a myth or concept. We're studying and practicing reality as it is. It's obvious. There's no interpretation needed. There's no understanding of, conceptual understanding, although we're always involved in it because we're students, we're on the path. But the more we begin to understand this, the more we let that go. The more we're just right here, with whatever is presenting itself. And at one point, I think in this chapter, he quotes the old Zen saying, "In the beginning, I chop wood and carry water, and in the end, I chop wood and carry water." In Vajrayana Buddhism, the quality of light or brilliance and the quality of sacredness are brought together. We're appreciating this extraordinarily beautiful, brilliant, vivid world that we live in. How is it vivid? It's vivid because we're not trying to get anywhere else. We're dropping all our preconceptions, our interpretations, and just here with this phenomenal display. He says, when our body, speech, and mind are synchronized, what that means is we're not thinking one thing and doing another. We're just right here. In fact, you don't even need thought at all. Right here, awake, aware of whatever it is that's presenting itself, your computer screen. This is the synchronization of body and mind. They're completely together, knowingness and what is known. And when they're synchronized, we are fully here. When we're not synchronized, we're thinking one thing and seeing another or doing another. And then we're not synchronized and we're not fully here. Because we are fully here, though, when we come present, we can't help experiencing the natural warmth, the natural isness, and the natural brilliance of this world. And this is what we're relaxing into. This is the practice, to come back to this natural brilliance, warmth, the isness of this world, and letting go of complexity. It's a beginning to trust, a beginning to realize that the goodness that we've been looking for is actually here already, and that all we have to do is to learn to relax into it, to trust it. And it's in our bodies, it's in the world. He says, you're true to yourself if you're here with your body, speech, and mind joined together. That kind of reality begins to dawn on you. There's tremendous discovery that you can actually trust this world and this body to be just what it is. And then he says, some traditions say that these kinds of experiences, it's like we're experiencing, contrasted to the confusion and suffering of samsara, we're experiencing heaven. And he says some traditions say these kinds of experiences will happen to you after you die. They say that if you were a good boy or a good girl, when you go to heaven, you find such things. But in Buddhism, we say that you can find them right here before you go to heaven, if there is such a thing as heaven at all. Such experiences are transmitted from teacher to disciple, and this is something that we're going to have to get into. This clarity of mind and the appreciation of this beauty, this vividness, can and often is transmitted to the student by the teacher. The teacher is someone who already understands this, and the student is someone who is open to it. And so the transmission takes place, and this is very, very Vajrayana. The teacher actually speaks the true Dharma on the spot to those who are worthy of it and to those who are ready for it. So the student has to be ready. He says, I'm afraid that I have to repeat this again and again and again. The teacher teaches the Vajrayana to those who have been tamed. Tamed means they've stopped looking out there for it, and pacified by means of the Hinayana in those who have become generous to themselves and others by means of the Mahayana. And what it means to be generous to oneself and others is that you realize the wholesomeness of your own being, and that you can communicate and share that with humor and warmth and love to others. He says about taming oneself. The fact that you are encountering these teachings means that you are karmically connected with the teachings of the Buddha. So even if you're sitting there thinking, this is just really hard, and I don't really get all this, but the fact that you're here is your karmic connection to these teachings. Your birth in a particular time and place has coincided with this presentation of the Vajrayana, which is a wonderful coincidence. He keeps repeating the necessity of going through the Hinayana, the first teachings, about individual salvation and cleaning up your act, which means beginning to come present, realizing that this present moment is where it's at. So you come back from dream in taming yourself through shamatha and vipassana, the basics of Buddhism. He says we begin to understand that we have to build a solid foundation in order to have a golden roof, which is, of course, the Vajrayana. And then he says, in the Vajrayana, along with faith and devotion means that you begin to connect and understand and make a commitment to this aspect of yourself and your world. And he says, in addition to this, we find that both relative and absolute bodhicitta manifest everywhere. And the absolute bodhicitta is this clarity that we can come back to from thought. And the relative bodhicitta means that coming back, we can address it, be part of it with heart, with warmth, with generosity, with kindness, both to ourselves and to others. And that it's very, very natural and increasingly, as we tread this path, easy. He says, basically, relative bodhicitta is benevolent compassion that is projected out in all directions, without exception. And it brings with it a notion of wakefulness, which is the absolute bodhicitta, because here we are, awake, eyes open, which is the product of the vipassana experience. So this is why we practice shamatha and vipassana. The vipassana experience, which is called many things as we go along, Rigpa, which is Vidya, which he talks about here, is one of the names. Rigpa is the Tibetan, Vidya is the Sanskrit, and it begins to be experienced throughout your life. It's the clear seeing when we come back from thought, dream, into this present moment, this clarity, which contains prajna, which is clarity again. And this is the core, he says, of the Vajrayana, coming back to this clarity, which contains prajna. Prajna is seeing without preconception, and it also contains immense warmth and compassion for whatever happens to present itself to us. And then he goes on to talk about that. He says your Vajrayana Vipassana awareness isn't mechanical. It contains softness and warmth. It is as if the temperature around you rises slightly, so the whole area is always warm and pliable. This is when you remember to return from dream, and you see this beautifully vivid, warm world. This arises whenever a person has fully accomplished basic awareness practice. So you begin to feel a quality of warmth and hospitality that automatically invites compassion and gentleness. And you begin to trust situations much more. And this is so important. We walk through our lives paranoid that we are doing something wrong, that something terrible is going to happen. This trust is a trust in your intelligence, your openness, your ability to respond, and in the warmth and fundamental goodness, as he puts it, wholesomeness of this world. That it's like beginning to trust your body, that your body will take in all of these things. Michael talked about the necessity of working with neuroses. And what happens is the way in which we do that is we take them in, we see them with this clarity, and in seeing them, we are released from them. When you see them with clarity, you're not bound to follow them out, to enact the hatred, to enact the jealousy, to enact the poverty mentality. All that is unnecessary completely, but we can see it. This is the clarity, the clear seeing of beginning to see your own thoughts, your mind, as it is, without judgment, without harshness, as part of your wholesome being. And this only happens when you return from dream. And it's the product of your own mindfulness and especially your own self-awareness in the Mahayana. So you begin to feel that the world is not filled with hostility and begin to see that in spite of its problems, the world is filled with possibilities of being genuine and opening up, and that each one of us can do this. So he says, when we talk about devotion, we don't mean devotion to the teacher as someone who is on your side, as opposed to the rest of the world, which is attacking you. We mean complete absence of warfare. This is the real meaning of devotion. Devotion to the Dharma, devotion to truth. Absence of warfare, because we're right here, dealing with whatever presents itself, dancing, responding. And the warmth, the softness, the hospitality and awareness. You begin to realize that there is warmth and gentleness in the phenomenal world, as well as in yourself. And you begin to realize and appreciate sacredness, because this is what sacred is. It's the fact that this world and each one of us is fundamentally warm, kind, gentle, worth being here for, and intelligent. That discovery is gold. So as we continue on our path, we commit ourselves to the Vajrayana and to all that that means about awareness, warmth, sacredness, and more. We want to change not only our thoughts and emotions and behavior patterns, but we want to change our entire existence altogether. It's a transformation of the world, involving our body, speech, and mind completely in the approach to reality known as Buddha Dharma, the enlightened way of dealing with reality properly. So in the Hinayana, the approach is to withdraw from the passion, aggression, provoking world and live in kind of very stillness, the stillness of mind. In the Mahayana, the approach is to exchange self for others. Tonglen. Tonglen is so important in the Mahayana. Tonglen involves beginning to understand that we can trust our bodies as the receptacle of everything mental, that it's all wholesome, that we can breathe in the suffering of others, and that the body, all by itself, will transform it. If we take a non-violent approach, you breathe in suffering, and then you send out happiness, wholesomeness, health. And the body acts as the transformative medium. But in the Vajrayana, we talk about the Vajra nature as an expression of being willing to relate more with the phenomenal world. This is what the Vajra nature and the nature of the Vajrayana is altogether. It's a constant dance with the beauty and meaningfulness of this world. In the Vajrayana, we are more than bodhisattvas. We work harder. We are willing to work with people's confusion more and more, further and further. So it is a much expanded notion of the bodhisattva ideal. And I'll stop there and we can have discussion.
I have a question, John. If in the Vajrayana we learn to have an appreciation for all phenomena and to even see phenomena as magical, doesn't that include one's neuroses? And if so, why the emphasis on thoughtless presence? There seems to be a contradiction there.
That thoughtless presence is the way in which you see your neuroses. You see them clearly as they arise. And it's very important to see them, yes, to bring them to awareness. And not only that, this is why Tonglen practice is so important. You breathe them in. You can breathe in your own neuroses as well as those of others. And when you do, when you breathe them in without judgment, without concept, without manipulation, but just with awareness, this clear awareness, you breathe it in. The body transforms it. By body, it's the mind-body complex. It transforms it with awareness. Awareness is what it transforms it. The clarity of seeing. We should practice Tonglen so much.
Oh, I am. I mean, I'm doing my Nundro, so I'm doing plenty of Tonglen.
Good. And when you do it, you just breathe in, and you can. It might help. You know, for instance, you could imagine an enemy, someone who bears you malice, and you breathe in the pain of knowing that person, that individual. And as you breathe it in with complete trust that your body can take that and transform it into wisdom, all by itself. If you get in the way, that won't happen, you know, trying to manipulate it. Thanks, Lane.
I had a question.
Meg.
So as I was reading this material and I kept coming across the word neurotic and neurosis, I found it kind of off-putting, and it felt like it was something that was, it feels like psychosis or something that can't be worked with. And I happen to be reading and studying shadow right now, in Carl Jung's shadow work that I'm doing, and so I guess this is a question for Michael, because I know you have a background in psychology or psychiatry or whatever, but it was helpful to me as I'm reading this to think of it in terms of the shadow rather than neurosis, because the shadow feels like something that's workable and transformative, and it's not something to be ashamed of, whereas neurosis feels there's a lot of shame involved. So I don't know. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Oh boy. I think he's using neurosis in a different way than it often is used in Western, psychological tradition. I mean, first of all, neurosis is considered workable, and even in the Western tradition. More shocking would be the statement that even psychosis is workable. But at least in some circumstances, it seems that it is. So it's not so much the workability. I think one thing Trungpa Rinpoche is trying to do is to present Buddhism in terms that are understandable to people. I don't think there's a term like neurosis in Tibetan, but you have notion of things like klesha and how that colors how we see things, how we act, how we see ourselves, how we see the world. So in a sense, that is a neurosis. It is a distortion of how things really are, which is one beginning way to try to understand neurosis. Psychosis is an even more extreme twist of seeing things very differently from how they actually are. But I think that's what he's trying to do, is just get across the idea that when we're caught up in grasping and fixation of any kind, we have a fixed idea of ourselves, fixed idea of the world, we start grasping after things based on that. And you could consider that neurosis. You could consider it shadow, what we do that we're not aware of, or that, what's more unconscious in a sense, because we're not fully aware and awake. So I think I think that would be a fine way to look at it as well. I think that's what he's trying to get across to us. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm getting some extra sound there, so change my. But I think it's an interesting question. There's a lot you could say, a lot of different ways that Buddhism is presented. And, one way I've, heard it presented is that there is a difference between how things appear and how they actually are. And that the path that we're following is becoming increasingly clear in our ability to see things as they are, not as we hope they are or fear they are, or not seeing things in a habitual way that again distorts how things actually are. So that would be another way of, I guess, understanding what he means by neurosis.
Yeah, I guess it's just, as far as like uncovering our neuroses, I, I suppose that during the process of meditation, if you have a regular practice, that you can be sure those neuroses are going to make themselves known. Um,
Well, they do all the time anyway, but I mean, if it's just more a question of we're open to it, but meditation certainly helps. But I mean, even people who don't meditate sometimes realize that, oh, I really blew it. I really went too far, or I really saw things, they realize after the fact that, they saw things in a way that was distorted or exaggerated. We have that experience all the time because fundamentally these things are inherent in us. So we have our moments, even if we don't practice. It's just that practice brings tremendous discipline and clarity to it and allows us to, develop more trust. But it doesn't put something in us that we don't already have. That's really an important point in all the honest, actually, that we're just opening that's why I was trying opening ourselves to ourselves. We have this capacity to see things as they are, because as Trungpa Rinpoche says, things are as they are.
Thanks, Michael.
So, Michael, would you consider emotions, kleshas, neuroses, passion, aggression, ignorance, or are they all basically the same thing?
No, I don't think emotion and klesha. Emotions can be part of klesha. I mean, there are emotions attached to the kleshas, but I don't think all emotion is necessarily klesha. No. But that's something that I have to really kind of think about. And I think that's why, again, it's really helpful to have some understanding of the Buddha families, because the idea is that, again, that in the experience of anger, there's the possibility of mirror-like wisdom and all accomplish, the experience of envy and jealousy, there's the possibility of all accomplishing action. In the experience of passion, there's the possibility of discriminating awareness wisdom, and so on. And we can experience these things. It's just when the energy gets fixated, when we're holding on to a sense of self, and it becomes like, all right, well, what about me and me first? And we develop those kinds of attitudes, then it gets twisted.
Well, I have another question if no one else has one. I don't understand the difference between speech neurosis and mind neurosis if speech neurosis includes unspoken thought. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, ultimately, he said that mind neurosis was body and speech neurosis teaming up. So that, but I think that's why I look back at the piece from Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, because I think he was talking about neurotic ways that relate to body, speech, and mind there as well. That when we take, and he actually combined speech more with the use of intellect, or more the function of conceptual mind and how we try to conceptualize and fixate things. That was, neurotic aspect or not neurotic expression of speech, as well as what he said here in terms of, our immediate reactions of like and dislike and so on and so forth. Mine's a little, it's a little harder with mine, but I think it's, anytime we try to, as I understand it, and, there are other ideas, I'm more than open to, I'd like to hear them, but I think it's anytime we try to solidify a state of mind and grasp and hold on to it.
I think too, I think too, the mind has to do with trying to achieve pleasurable states. So, for instance, the trance states in Buddhism, or going to a psychotherapist to achieve happiness, rather than sanity and clarity. It has to do with a kind of self-indulgence and pleasure with mind, whereas speech has to do with concept. Using concept to try and order your world in a way that eliminates pain and promotes pleasure.
I think I got it now. That makes sense. It means mind more in terms of state rather than the thoughts of mind.
Yeah.
Especially when these concepts were first developed, the idea of the Lord of Mind really had to do with the creation of these trance states, where you focus your mind one-pointedly on an object to such a degree that you basically hypnotize yourself. And they're very pleasurable, those states. And that was one of the main targets of the Lord of, identifying the Lord of Mind.
Thanks, Michael. John?
But I think if you use meditation in any way to promote pleasure, rather than sanity and clarity and openness to others and oneself, then maybe that's the Lord of Mind too. What do you think, Michael?
I think it's another way of describing the same thing, trying to attain and grasp onto a particular state of mind and hold on to that.
Yeah.
And, as, it's basic Buddhism 101, anything that's created is impermanent. So in the end, it's going to lead to suffering. But we still try. Kurt?
Yeah, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, or maybe not. But as we're moving from the Mahayana into the Vajrayana, what I got a sense of, especially as you were speaking, John, is the Vajrayana just feels to me so much more grounded in the reality that we live in. That just seeing our reality for what it is, where the Mahayana had that, to me, a much more conceptual idea of emptiness as form and form as emptiness. And it was really difficult to get my head wrapped around that. Whereas you spoke tonight about the Vajrayana, it felt to me, and again, maybe I'm oversimplifying, much more attainable. That I think, basically coming down to the difference between the relative reality and the absolute reality. And I don't know, I just wanted to hear if you had something to say about that. Because somehow I felt much more comfortable with the Vajrayana than I have with the Mahayana.
That's terrific. Yeah, I can understand why Mahayana, as we've approached it with Shunyata, gets much more abstract and conceptual, but you can get there in the Vajrayana too. The main thing with the Vajrayana is that in the lower yanas, there's this notion that Buddhahood is out there, and that if I do thus and so, I will improve myself and eventually become that Buddha. Whereas in the Vajrayana, it's saying something very different. It's saying Buddhahood, enlightenment, is already in here. We've just lost track of it and gotten confused and are missing it. And so what the path is about discovering your true nature that's already present. And the whole thing of, absolute bodhicitta, of coming present, of this clarity, which is so important, he says it here that it's key, is really touching in to maybe the first aspect of what it means to be a Buddha. This natural, inborn, innate, keep repeating the same thing, clarity, vidya, seeing. It's vipassana, is another name for it. This open awareness and learning how to rest in that more and more and more until it becomes basically who one is. This is Vajrayana. So there's this big difference that the Vajrayanists point out all the time between the lower yanas, Hinayana and Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. They say that the lower yanas they have a path to a goal, whereas in the Vajrayana, the goal is introduced to the student experientially, and then the path is taking that goal again and again. So the goal becomes the path in the Vajrayana. This is a big distinction that's made. More and more, the higher you go in the yanas, especially when you get to the great perfection teachings. Well, we're getting close.
Yeah, I think Kurt's. I was very interested in Kurt's reaction because I had a similar, I think, and I'm not sure it's a fair statement, but in terms of relative truth, it seems like it has always seemed to me there was something pejorative about living in the relative world, and from the Mahayana perspective, subtle, and I could be,
No, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the Vajrayana, we're embracing it.
It's absolutely.
Oh, okay, good.
Absolutely.
I have absolute relative take on that. Good. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, the Vajrayana is all about the beauty of this relative world and how it communicates this beauty and power and meaning. They say that the enlightened beings, the siddhas, holders of power, that all that's left for them is to constantly dance and explore this beautiful, beautiful, phenomenal world, to dance with it, explore it, play with it. One of the big terms is rolpa, which means play. And that these enlightened beings, they either dissolve into nothing, or if they're inspired, they come back out of compassion for us. a constant compassion. It's like they want to continue the conversation and to help all these confused sentient beings, which are absolutely limitless in number, by the way. We are. So this is the teaching. Well, perhaps we should end. What do you think?
Yep.
Okay. Nick, I'll put the chants up and you can lead us. And I'm going to mute all, I guess.
We'll close with a prayer for peace, and then we'll dedicate the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. See you soon.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Sarah
you.
Gorman. Oh, well.
Thank you both, Michael and John, and everybody.
So you had a new person here, Sarah Gorman, huh?
Yeah. And Scott, new old person apparently.
Scott said he'd been to Westchester Buddhist Center years ago.
The new old person.
Hi, Karen Sue.
The new person.
Bye. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night. Bye, Michael. Thank you. Barry.
Night.
John,
Yes, Barry.
this
Wait a second.